High above Europe, silence can be misleading. Covered in snow, shaped by ice and time, the Swiss Alps seem still, untouched. But that stillness is only on the surface. Up here, where cold can freeze in minutes, and a single misstep can be fatal. Life never really stops. Every movement costs energy, every decision carries risk, and every season rewrites the rules. Today, we explore these mountains differently, not as visitors, but as witnesses to a wild world that rarely reveals itself. Because in the Alps, survival isn't enough. You have to endure. The Swiss Alps are one of Europe's most iconic landscapes, a vast mountain range stretching across the continent, with peaks rising over 4,000 meters. At first glance, it feels timeless, almost unchanged. But look closer, and a different story begins to emerge. This is not a frozen world. It's a living system in constant motion. For much of the year, temperatures remain below freezing. Winds sweep across exposed ridges, and snow blankets nearly everything. In these conditions, finding food becomes a daily challenge. Every species here has its own strategy. Some endure, some hide, and some simply disappear until conditions improve. Then everything shifts. With the arrival of summer, the ice retreats. For a brief window, the landscape transforms. Meadows emerge, plants grow rapidly, and insects return in large numbers. Activity surges. It becomes a race against time. Feed, grow, reproduce, prepare, before winter returns, because it always does. Throughout this documentary, we'll follow how different species navigate this extreme environment, from small mammals to large predators, from those that rule the skies to those that cling to near vertical cliffs. And if you're drawn to the hidden patterns of the natural world, this is a good moment to subscribe and explore more stories like this. Because in the Alps, every detail matters, and what looks like a harsh, empty place is actually one of the most finely balanced ecosystems on Earth. In the depths of winter, the Alps feel empty. Snow covers everything. Trails vanish, water slows or freezes, and sound itself seems to fade. But this silence doesn't mean life is gone. It means life has gone hidden. Beneath the snow, another world continues. A network of narrow tunnels stretches under the surface, where small mammals find shelter from wind and extreme cold. Down there, temperatures are more stable. Not warm, but survivable. The mountain hare is built for this. As winter sets in, its coat turns from brown to nearly pure white. It's not just a seasonal change, it's camouflage. In a landscape defined by snow, contrast can be deadly. Even so, survival isn't easy. Food is limited. Twigs, bark, whatever vegetation can be uncovered. It's a poor diet, but enough to keep the body going. Still, it's never truly safe. High above, something is watching. A golden eagle. From the sky, it can detect movement across vast distances. What looks like a blank white expanse is, to it, full of signals. And when it decides to strike, there's no warning. The dive is fast, controlled, precise. In seconds, the silence breaks, and just as quickly returns. But not all predators hunt from above. Between rocks and scattered trees, another hunter moves in near total silence, the Eurasian lynx. Unlike the eagle, it relies on proximity. It uses terrain, shadows, elevation, cover, to close the distance unnoticed. Its wide paws act like natural snowshoes, allowing it to move without sinking. It doesn't chase, it waits, and when the moment comes, it commits. Here, every movement has a cost. In winter, survival isn't about strength or speed. It's about efficiency. And while all of this unfolds on the surface, beneath the ground, one species has chosen a completely different approach. No hunting, No running. No exposure. Just waiting. And when the snow begins to recede, it will be among the first to return. As the days slowly grow longer, something begins to shift. The cold is still there. Snow still dominates the landscape. But beneath the surface, the balance is changing. And with it, one of the Alps' most familiar inhabitants returns. The Alpine marmot wakes. For months, its body remained in hibernation. Its temperature dropped, heart rate slowed dramatically, and its metabolism entered a state of near shutdown, all to survive the winter. Now that process reverses. Gradually, the body reactivates. But emerging isn't easy. Outside, the environment is still harsh, food is scarce, and predators are still active. So the first movements are cautious. Marmots don't live alone. They form colonies, and that social structure is key to their survival. There is always one on watch. At the slightest sign of danger, a sharp whistle cuts through the air. It's a simple signal, but an effective one. That sound can mean the difference between escape and capture. Their awakening doesn't happen in isolation. It marks the beginning of a broader transition. As temperatures rise, snow begins to retreat. Patches of ground reappear, releasing nutrients stored for months. Soon, the first hardy plants begin to grow. And where plants return, insects follow. It's the start of a chain reaction. For the red fox, this changes everything. Winter offered uncertainty, but now opportunities increase. Small mammals, birds, leftovers, anything becomes a resource. It becomes more active, more exploratory. Nothing is wasted. At the same time, in higher elevations, other species begin to move. They spent the harshest months lower down, but now they climb. The mountain is waking up, and this transition doesn't last long, because in the Alps, summer doesn't arrive gently. It arrives all at once, and when it does, everything accelerates. The change isn't gradual. Within weeks, the landscape transforms completely. What was once silent and white becomes alive with color, movement, and sound. In the Alps, summer doesn't ease in. It bursts open. As the snow retreats, alpine meadows emerge. Flowers bloom in intense colors, adapted to grow quickly and make the most of a very short season. Time is limited. Insects appear in large numbers. Bees, butterflies, beetles, constantly moving, feeding, pollinating. It's a surge of activity that supports the entire ecosystem. For large herbivores, this is the most important time of the year. The Alpine ibex moves higher. With remarkable precision, it climbs near vertical rock faces. Its hooves are specially adapted, rigid edges with soft, gripping centers, allowing it to balance where few animals could stand. Up there, food is more abundant, and competition is lower. But it's not alone. The chamois shares these heights. Lighter and faster, it moves quickly across steep terrain, always alert. At the first sign of danger, it can vanish in seconds. These high-altitude zones act as natural refuges, but they're not completely safe. In the sky, the golden eagle still patrols. With more activity comes more opportunity. Young animals, distracted individuals, small mammals, all potential targets. And this is also the season of birth. New life appears across the mountains. Young are born vulnerable, dependent, exposed. Every day matters. They must feed, grow, learn, and adapt quickly, because the margin for error is small. Meanwhile, among sun-warmed rocks, another predator emerges. The weasel. Small, fast, and highly efficient, it specializes in tight spaces. It can enter burrows, chase prey underground, and disappear just as quickly. Nothing in this environment goes unnoticed. Summer brings abundance, but also competition. Each species is trying to make the most of this narrow window, because even now, time is running out. As summer reaches its peak, the rhythm of the Alps begins to change again. Abundance doesn't bring peace, it brings pressure. Food is available, but not unlimited. And now, it's no longer just about finding it, it's about holding on to it. Across the slopes and valleys, invisible boundaries take shape. For the red fox, territory is everything. It moves constantly, not just in search of prey, but to maintain control. Scent markings are placed along trails, rocks, and vegetation, signals that define ownership without direct confrontation. Most of the time, these signals are enough, but not always. Occasionally, another fox crosses the line. What follows is rarely a full fight. Instead, a sequence of warnings, stiff posture, low growls, short bursts of pursuit. Energy is measured carefully, because an injury here doesn't just hurt. It lingers, it weakens. It can become fatal weeks later. Avoiding damage is part of survival. Higher up, conflict becomes more visible. Male ibex begin testing each other. They approach slowly at first, circling, assessing. Then, suddenly, they rise onto their hind legs and collide. The impact echoes across the mountains. It looks violent, and it is, but it's also controlled. Their skulls are built to absorb these blows. These clashes are not random. They establish hierarchy, and hierarchy determines access to space, to food, and eventually, to mating opportunities. But even here, there's restraint. Too much force, too much risk, and both animals lose. Meanwhile, in quieter corners of the mountain, something more subtle unfolds: the presence of the lynx. It doesn't need to show itself. Its effect is indirect, but powerful. Areas once active become quieter. Trails used regularly are suddenly avoided. Prey species adjust their behavior, feeding at different times, choosing less exposed routes. This is what ecologists call a landscape of fear. The predator shapes the ecosystem without constant action. And yet, encounters still happen. Here's a young chamois strays too far from the group. A marmot hesitates just a second too long. A movement is misread. And in those moments, everything accelerates. But not every hunt ends in success. In fact, most don't. A failed chase costs energy. A missed opportunity cannot be recovered. And in an environment like this, repeated failure adds up quickly. That's what keeps the balance intact. If predators succeeded too often, prey populations would collapse. If they failed too often, predators wouldn't survive. So the system adjusts, constantly, invisibly. And as this tension builds across the landscape, it sets the stage for something even more demanding. If you've made it this far, this is a great moment to subscribe and follow the full journey, because what comes next pushes every species even further. But because now, it's no longer just about territory, it's about the next generation. At the height of summer, the Alps seem generous. Food is available, days are long, movement is everywhere. But for those just beginning life here, this is the most vulnerable stage of all. Because in the Alps, being born is only the first step. Staying alive is something else entirely. Marmot pups emerge from their burrows for the first time. At first, everything is new. Light, space, distance. They move in short bursts, hesitant, curious, constantly testing their surroundings. But curiosity comes with exposure. They wander a little too far, pause a little too long, and above them, something is always watching. That's why the colony matters. Adult marmots take turns standing guard, scanning the horizon. Their warning call, a sharp, eye-piercing whistle, cuts instantly through the air. The reaction is immediate. Every marmot dives for cover. There's no confusion, no delay, because hesitation, even for a second, can be enough. Higher up, the challenge is different, but no less severe. Ibex are born into vertical worlds. Within hours, they must stand. Within days, they must climb. There is no protected space, no safe ground. Their playground is a cliff. Young ibex learn by following. Step by step, they mimic the movements of adults, testing balance, grip, timing. Sometimes a hoof slips. Sometimes small stones break loose beneath them. And in those moments, instinct takes over. Because there is no room for correction, only reaction. Survival here is immediate. Above the cliffs, in nests built along sheer rock faces, golden eagle chicks grow quickly. When they are fed constantly, meat delivered from below. This rapid growth is essential. Their wings develop fast. Soon, they begin to test them. At first, it's just movement, stretching, flapping, adjusting balance. Then, small jumps, short glides, controlled falls that slowly become flight. But the risk is real. A misjudged attempt, and the fall is unforgiving. Not all of them make it past this stage, and down below, another predator is already taking advantage of this fragile moment. The weasel. It moves quickly, silently, slipping through cracks and tunnels. For it, the presence of young animals means opportunity. Burrows that once offered safety can become traps. A hidden entrance, a narrow passage, and suddenly, there's no escape. It's efficient, direct, unseen until it's too late. Across the Alps, this is a season of growth, but also of selection. Many are born. Not all will continue. And while the landscape still feels alive, still feels full, the clock is already ticking. Because every lesson learned now will decide who survives what comes next. Summer is still in control, but something begins to shift. The urgency changes. It's no longer just about taking advantage of abundance. Now it's about efficiency. Because even in summer, energy is never unlimited. High above the Alpine valleys, the golden eagle dominates the airspace. It doesn't rush. Instead, it reads the landscape. Rising currents of warm air, thermals, carry it upward without effort. With wings fully extended, it scans the terrain below in wide, deliberate circles. From this height, detail matters. A slight movement in the grass, a shadow that shifts against the slope, a pause where there shouldn't be one. Each signal is evaluated, because not every target is worth the risk. A failed attack costs more than time. It costs energy that may not be easily recovered. So the eagle chooses carefully, then commits. The dive begins almost silently. Wings tighten. Speed builds rapidly. The angle is calculated, adjusted mid-air, and in a matter of seconds, the distance disappears. If successful, the outcome is immediate. If not, the cost lingers. Climbing back into the air requires effort, and repeated failure changes everything. Down below, among broken rock and shifting shadows, the lynx operates differently. It avoids open ground when possible, prefers edges, where forest meets stone, where visibility is uneven. Its world is built on distance control, and step by step, it reduces the gap between itself and its target. Every pause matters, every shift in wind direction. It listens as much as it sees. A misplaced sound, a rock dislodged, a twig under pressure, can end the attempt before it begins. So it waits, sometimes for minutes, sometimes longer. Then, when the distance is right, it moves. A short burst of speed, a controlled leap, no prolonged chase, because this is not about endurance, it's about timing. Still, success is never guaranteed. A chamois reacts just in time. A hare changes direction unpredictably. A moment is lost, and the opportunity disappears. Failure is common, more common than success, and that is exactly what keeps the system in balance. Elsewhere, closer to the meadows, the red fox follows a more flexible strategy. It doesn't specialize in one method. It adapts. At times, it becomes almost motionless, ears focused, body aligned, listening for movement beneath the grass. Then suddenly, it leaps. A precise jump aimed at prey hidden below the surface. Other times, it scavenges, follows scent trails, investigates remains left behind by larger predators. Nothing is ignored. This versatility allows it to survive where others might struggle. But even this flexibility has limits, because the environment is already changing. Days are becoming shorter. Temperatures begin to drop, almost unnoticed at first. And with that, the rhythm of abundance starts to fade. For predators, this means fewer chances. For everyone else, it means time is running out. The change doesn't arrive with a clear signal. It begins quietly, almost unnoticed. That summer is still present, but it no longer feels stable. Mornings carry a sharper cold. Shadows stretch longer across the slopes, and high above, thin layers of frost begin to return overnight. Subtle shifts. But in the Alps, subtle is enough. The vegetation responds first. Flowers that once covered the meadows begin to disappear. Colors fade. Growth slows. What was vibrant weeks ago now starts to thin out. And with that, food becomes less predictable. For marmots, this is the most critical phase of the year. There's no more time to explore. Now, everything is focused on accumulation. They feed constantly. Long, uninterrupted periods of foraging. Every plant, every remaining patch of vegetation becomes valuable. The goal is simple. Build enough fat to survive months underground without eating. Behavior changes with it. No, but they take fewer risks, stay closer to their burrows, react faster to threats. Energy is no longer spent freely. It's managed. On the slopes, ibex and chamois begin adjusting their positions, not dramatically, but deliberately. They start descending, following the last available food sources as higher elevations lose their productivity. Timing is everything. Move too early, and they lose access to better feeding grounds. Move too late, and there may be nothing left. It's a narrow window, and they have to get it right. Predators feel the shift as well. The golden eagle sees less movement from above, fewer exposed targets, longer search times. The lynx faces a different challenge. With prey dispersing and becoming more cautious, it must expand its range. Travel farther. Spend more energy tracking. Each hunt becomes more demanding. And still, success is not guaranteed. The balance begins to tighten. And then another presence becomes more visible. Along narrow trails, across valleys, near grazing areas, signs appear. Tracks that don't belong to wildlife. Structures, sounds, movement, humans. Because while the ecosystem prepares for winter, these mountains are not empty. They are shared. And that shared space creates a new kind of tension. In the Swiss Alps, humans are not outsiders. They've been part of this landscape for centuries. Long before tourism, before ski resorts, before marked trails, people were already adapting to the same forces that shape wildlife here. And in summer, that presence becomes more visible. Across the valleys, movement increases. Herders guide their livestock uphill, following a seasonal rhythm known as transhumance. Cattle, sheep, and goats are led to high-altitude pastures, where fresh grass emerges after the snow melts. For a few months, these slopes become shared ground. It's a system built over generations, using the mountain without exhausting it. But even balanced systems create ripple effects. Where there are herds, there is scent. Where there is movement, there is opportunity. The red fox is often the first to respond. It approaches cautiously, staying at a distance, observing. Small animals attracted to the grazing areas, leftover food, subtle changes in the environment. Everything becomes part of its calculation. Occasionally, even the lynx crosses these zones. It avoids direct contact with humans, but it doesn't ignore vulnerability. And that's where tension emerges. For herders, livestock is livelihood. Loss is not abstract, it's immediate. So protection becomes essential. Large guard dogs are introduced into the system, trained, alert, territorial. They patrol the edges of herds, responding quickly to any perceived threat. Unlike wild predators, they don't hesitate. When they engage, it's direct. This creates a boundary, not fixed, not absolute, but present, a line between two needs. On one side, survival shaped by instinct. On the other, survival shaped by tradition and economy. And yet, in many parts of the Alps, coexistence is not just possible, it's managed. Wildlife monitoring programs track predator movements. Compensation systems help offset losses. Preventive strategies evolve over time. It's not perfect, but it's functional. Because here, separation isn't an option. Both worlds occupy the same terrain. If you've been following this journey, this is a good moment to like the video and share where you're watching from. It's always fascinating to see how far these mountain stories travel. Meanwhile, above it all, the season continues to shift. Temperatures drop more noticeably, light fades earlier, and across the peaks, winter is already on its way. Now the shift is undeniable. Autumn in the Alps doesn't linger, it accelerates. Temperatures drop steadily, winds grow sharper, more persistent. And across the higher elevations, snow begins to return, not as a memory, but as a warning. At first, it comes lightly, a thin layer in the morning, gone by midday. But each time it returns, it lasts a little longer. For the animals, this is the final window. No more delay, no more adjustment, only execution. Marmots retreat underground. After weeks of near-constant feeding, they return to their burrow systems, complex networks with dedicated chambers for hibernation. Before sealing themselves in, they block entrances with soil and vegetation. It's insulation, protection against cold, and predators. Inside, they will remain for months. Heart rate slowed, body temperature lowered, living off what they've stored. Above ground, ibex and chamois have already repositioned. Now, at lower elevations, they reduce movement. Feeding becomes more selective. Energy conservation becomes the priority. Even their bodies respond. Their coats thicken, muscles tighten, behavior simplifies. Everything unnecessary is eliminated. In the air, the golden eagle still hunts, but conditions are changing. When thermals weaken as the ground loses heat, flight becomes more demanding. Time spent soaring decreases. Every hunt must count. And then there's the lynx. For it, winter can become an advantage. Snow slows prey, reveals tracks, limits escape routes. But this moment, this transition, is unpredictable. Not enough snow to help, not enough stability to rely on. It must adapt quickly, and not all do. Some animals fall behind, young that didn't gain enough weight, individuals weakened by injury. Those that misjudged the timing, even slightly, they become part of the system in a different way. Because in environments like this, nothing is wasted. Loss feeds survival. And then, almost without warning, the landscape changes again. White begins to take over, and with it, the cycle resets. The transition is complete. The snow once again defines the landscape. It softens edges, erases trails, and reshapes the terrain into something quieter, but far more demanding. The Alps return to their most extreme state. But this time, nothing here is unprepared. Every species has already made its move. Beneath the surface, marmots lie in deep hibernation. Their bodies operate at minimal levels, sustained entirely by the reserves built during summer. Time, for them, is paused. Above ground, the larger herbivores remain active. Ibex and chamois endure the cold through strategy, not speed. They move across wind-exposed slopes where snow is thinner, searching for whatever vegetation remains accessible. It's not much, but it's enough. They limit movement, avoid unnecessary risk. Every step is deliberate. For predators, the landscape shifts in their favor. The lynx becomes more efficient. Snow slows its prey, but its own movement remains controlled. Its wide paws distribute weight, allowing it to move across the surface with less effort. It stays unseen, but more effective than ever. The red fox adapts once again. It listens beneath the snow, detecting movement below the surface. Then, with a sudden leap, it dives headfirst into the white, targeting prey hidden underneath. At other times, it scavenges, follows scent trails, finds what others leave behind. Its strength lies in flexibility. In the sky, activity decreases. The golden eagle still patrols, but less frequently. The cost of flight is higher now. Every movement must be justified. And down in the valleys, human presence shifts with the season. Now come skiers, climbers, travelers. To them, the Alps are a place of beauty. To the animals, nothing has changed. It is still a place of survival. And even in this apparent stillness, life continues, quiet, hidden, persistent. Because winter is not the end. It's part of the system, a phase in a cycle that never truly stops. The Swiss Alps are a landscape of extremes, intense cold, short summers, constant change, and yet, life persists. Across the seasons, each species finds its way to adapt. There is no certainty here, no permanent balance, only adjustment. From marmots that vanish beneath the ground, to lynx that move without being seen, from eagles that command the sky, to human communities that have learned to live within these mountains. Everything is connected, and that may be the most important truth. Nature doesn't stand still. It responds. It shifts. It continues. If you've made it this far, consider subscribing and exploring more journeys like this, because there are still countless places where life pushes the limits of what seems possible, and each one has a story waiting to be revealed.